Okay, welcome to the CEFACT Global Trust Registry project. This meeting is on the 23rd of January 2026. For those of us in Australia, it may not be, it may be the day before if you're in other parts of the world. This is the meeting that is for mostly the kind of Pacific Standard Time, Canada, USA kind of participants, and those from Australia that couldn't make yesterday. Quick reminder, this is a CEFACT project. That means we have various rules that we follow, including the open development process and rules to do with intellectual property rights. Basically, the work we do is for the public good and should be accessible to all, royalty-free. Read the links and the rules if you wish to, and just be aware that if you're offering insights or comments that are in fact proprietary. What we're going to do today effectively is reflect a little what we talked about yesterday, but we're going to actually work through the GitLab issues, and gratefully we've got both significant authors, both Sankashan and Steve, have been putting some content into the issues, so it'll be good to have them kind of walk through those with us. I'll just give a quick recap that I gave yesterday on the meetings we had 2 weeks ago. So basically, in those meetings, a couple of things came up. We were reflecting on the continued sort of, I guess, snowball type interest that we want to encourage with other registrars. So His Majesty's Revenue and Customs from the UK were expressing interest at the end of last year, and I'm looking to bring them back on board again as January sort of comes to an end. We also had discussions to do with the European identifier, which is part of the sort of EIDAS sort of framework and the European Identity Business Wallet and this sort of thing, and a recognition that we need to be very clear in the way we're communicating about the grid and DI, that these are not threats or competitors to the existing national identifier schemes or international or regional schemes and so on. Rather, this can be a container type structure. So that kind of was the guts of the two meetings. Probably on the meeting 2 weeks ago this time, we had some new content from Mark Lazar, who's a world-recognized expert in consent and consent receipts. He's part of an author of the consent receipt standard and one of the NISO standards and so on. So he had a particular angle on the privacy aspects of content. My personal feeling on that is that grid and DIAs, to the extent we're able, are not yet going to go into that individual content kind of space where, whilst we all know companies have registered officers who are authorities and liable for and so on, we don't yet need to include that concept into grid and DIA to make them very, very useful from an economic point of view. At some point, we may need to get there, but we don't have to do it right now. Any comments on those updates? That's pretty well saying you're in both meetings. That more or less what we talked about 2 weeks ago.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Well, with that, I'll go to the issue log. So if I click this link, it'll open yet another thing on the list of the issues. Now I need to be sharing my screen, and I wasn't sharing my screen. I did this yesterday. And not be sharing my screen. I must be saying things so clearly you all have a picture in your head of what I'm looking at. I don't think so. Right. This is the list of issues. We'll go through them in more or less the order they're presented, but we'll kind of simplify it a bit. And Steve, I'll bring yours forward. In fact, yours is the second one we talk about. I really do want your comment on the first one. Right. So yesterday, I explained to the group that when we started the project back in sort of April of last year, more or less, in fact, when it was first, the brief was written up in January of last year, we were expecting a kind of July 2026 plenary, because that was basically what had happened in 2025. There was a 2025 July plenary, and therefore the expectation was to be the same in 2026. It's not the same. At one point towards the end of 2025, I thought it was a May plenary. I think I saw some things that said it was a May plenary, but now quite clearly it's not. It's a November plenary. In the meantime, Steve, you've helped me understand that I don't need to worry about those things too much, because if we're producing useful, stable, good documentation, making suggestions, let's not use the word recommendation because that might get misunderstood, but good concrete suggestions about what can happen next, we can publish those when we're ready. And they can then be used as the argument for the next phases, if you like, of the project work. And that's the kind of summary, I guess, of where I'm heading to with this issue, is that whilst the real dates are now November plenary and November forum, and I think there's a May forum still, we as a project work to finalize our documents and maintain the momentum on the pilots and kind of publish as soon as we're ready. And my hope is that will be, say, the end of March.
Yeah.
Steve, is that more or less right?
Yeah, so look, first thing I'd say is the most important thing for any project is to publish quality material that has reached a level of consensus and some sort of pilot testing, right? Irrespective of formal meetings, that's the most important thing, right? In other words, don't rush to meet a timeline and deliver something untested or without adequate consensus, because that just shooting yourself in the foot. Now, when it comes to these formal meetings, the way the governance and CEFACT works is that our shareholders are member states, right? So the plenary, not the forum. Forum's just a chit-chat meeting. Right? The plenary is where member states agree or disagree certain decisions. Now, there is also a group called the Bureau, which is a bunch of volunteers, and I'm one of them, that prepares, if you like, material for plenary decision, and in some cases is empowered by itself to approve and make decisions. Right? So CEFACT distinguishes between technical standards, and you could argue a good part of the grid, and certainly the DIA is a technical standard. And those things don't need to be plenary approved. They just need to be Bureau approved. So at any time when you're ready, we can say, we think this is ready for the next stage, which is in the UN process called public consultation. Now, obviously, because we're working in public, arguably, we already had public consultation, right? But there's the technically how we work, and then there's the formal, okay, you know, UN says, hey, member states, public consultation time, please comment on this. So there'll come a point in your life cycle when you say, I'm ready for public consultation. Then me as your Bureau member will say to the rest of the Bureau, please approve this for public consultation. And it'll be a 30-day window. Whatever feedback we get, they acknowledge it, implement it or reject it or whatever is relevant, and then release a final version. And that's all of that can all be done without plenary. But there is another type of document that CEFACT releases called recommendations, and the UNECE recommendations to member states. Those things must be plenary approved. And so this project, I think, is a candidate to not only produce a technical specification, but also a plenary member state policy recommendation, right? Because it makes obvious sense to write something. It doesn't have to be long, by the way. These can be 10-page documents. In fact, the shorter the better to some extent. That makes the case for why a member state should implement grid. So there's an opportunity to do that in time for the November plenary, which I probably think should be grasped. But there's a fair bit of backlog from that, like, you know, okay, it's got to go out to member states. I can't remember, let's say a month before the plenary, but before that, it's got to be translated. That takes a month. Before that, it's got to be public review. That takes 2 months. And, you know, so even though it's November, seems like a long way off, you'd need to produce a draft recommendation, policy recommendation by, I don't know, probably I have to work it out, but something like end of May or something like that. Anyway, so that's it. Is that clear enough?
It is, and I think that actually is encouraging because it gives us both a deadline to work to, arguably for May. By the May forum, we should be in a position to have the workshop or the talking shop, or whatever we want to call it, and have already published our documents about the specification and so on. And then we're in a position then to kind of draft the or have ready the draft specific recommendation to be going through the process that you're describing. So yes, that's helpful. Thank you, Steve. The other issue that you're very much aware of is this one. We were talking about this just before we started the recording.
Okay.
Steve, I'll let you talk to it if you like.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So over in the UNTP project space, we have a need for a bit of specificity and verification of registry membership. But in this case, it's registers of product IDs like GS1s, or registers of facility IDs like Open Supply Hub. And these are not formal, if you like, national governed and UN governed registers. So in a business scope sense, they, at least for now, they don't fit in the grid project. But what you realize is that this pattern that the grid is implementing of somebody's a member of a register that has some value, and that register attests that membership with an identity credential, But somebody else has to say, yes, but this register is a member of this, if you like, international club of recognized registers. That pattern applies many times over and repeats, and often not including the UN. So an obvious one is conformity credentials. Let's say a conformity assessment body says CESU is ISO 9000 certified. Next question is, nice, but who says that that conformity assessment body is accredited to make that sort of assessment? The answer is JASANS in Australia, which is a national authority, accreditation authority of conformity bodies. The next question is, yeah, but who says JASANS is the Australian National Accreditation Authority? And the answer is ILAC, which is a international body. It's not a UN body, but it's an international association of accreditation authorities, right? So it's basically the same pattern repeating. And so what I think we'll find is that some of those patterns will actually be UN governed in a data sense, right? Like yours, because who else is going to be the aggregation point for business registers and land registers?
Yeah.
But other patterns will be governed by some other authority, nothing to do with the UN. But what I want to do is take the same pattern and apply it to facilities and products in UNTP outside of grid governance, but with grid solution. And to do that, what I needed is some extra data elements. And these are data elements that I think apply equally to you, which is if you want one of the big complaints that you hear from, let's say, Glyph and others is, or DUNS, or anyone that produces unique international numbers is, oh no, you can't use national business numbers because they're not globally unique. And well, that's kind of a sort of true, but nonsense argument, right? Because it's not very hard to make them globally unique by just concatenating a globally unique identifier for the registrar and the registered member. And in the technical linked data world, those are URIs, right? So what this ticket is saying is, please ask each member register to declare what their scheme ID is, like registradores.org or abr.business.gov.au, and then please provide a scheme pattern by which you can make a globally unique ID for the given member. And that's up to each register to say how to do that. And for example, in Australia, it could be abr.business.gov.au/ABN number. That's it. But it's up to the register to say that. When you say that, now you've got a globally unique ID pattern. So nobody can say that Australian business number is not globally unique. Yeah, it is. You just follow that pattern. That's what this ticket's about.
Exactly, and I think it becomes clearer when we look at the actual merge request itself, and just look at the particular changes that you created through the merge request. It's reasonably simple to see there's a see the changes. There's effectively one line which was called technical endpoint, which was not very well expressed in any detail, is being replaced by effectively a number of lines which give a much better expression about what a technical endpoint might be and how it might be expressed. And yes, to the point you were also making, Steve, I think there's also a concatenation opportunity within the grid, at least, that says a country has a unique, we've chosen the ISO standard 3 alpha letters for countries. So each country has a unique 3 alpha string. If you were to prepend any of their kind of registrar with that before the Oz.ASIC. whatever, you'd end up with a unique string. Because within the registrar, they do issue unique identifiers. They're not necessarily globally unique on their own. So that go.
Yeah, I was going to say, of course, many of these existing registers, including Australia's ABR, already are publicly accessible, right? And there is a pattern. I put it in there, I think, in the view, human viewable URL, right? So, but often that pattern is a consequence of a fairly random technical implementation. It's just the way the query worked, right? So in Australia, it's abr.business.gov.au/ABN $ABN equals number, right? Okay. And that, if you substitute the ABN in that, you will get the human readable page about that ABN. And there's probably similar patterns for dozens of other registers around the world. And that's today's reality. But the question is, it doesn't follow, from, in my mind anyway, that is the authoritative, globally unique URI or URN for that member. That just happens to be the URL pattern by which you get a human readable view of that entry. That's why I've got separate lines for these things. And if you had a white sheet of paper, you'd start with, it'd all be the same, because the globally unique ID for the member would also be resolvable, and would be a link resolver endpoint, and it'd just be one. But the reality is not like that. That's why I got 3 lines. Right? But yeah, that's it.
So I think, so in yesterday's discussion, which you weren't able to be part of, but we kind of, I rather confused the discussion by introducing the idea of this repeatable pattern, but there was a concern that might be an inclusion, as you mentioned at the beginning, of responsibilities or scope within Gridman. As you've clearly articulated, that's not the intent. And I'm expecting, I'm going to leave the issue open for until say Monday morning, but I'll just to allow others to read and review. Sure, but I think it's cool. So I think that's going to be a merged acceptance sort of process. Now I want to go back to the other issues, because I think we're next on the one that Sankashan has been looking at. So Sankashan, you talk now. I've been talking too much.
Okay. So this issue has, I think, the verbatim post of the email that Brett had sent to John, which is, I don't know why Brett then was very aghast that it was copy pasted publicly, but it seems very, it's very nice. It's well structured and focuses on some of the things we need to change. But in the truest sense of the term, this is feedback. And what I did this morning is I converted this feedback into specific individual things that we can review and fix on the website. So there are linked issues that are 10 in number. The number seems large, but they're actually small changes to be done. But each of those linked items actually have a scope and an acceptance criteria added, so that anybody who's reviewing the changes can say that, okay, it meets the criteria, we should resolve this and consider this done. And that's all about it. These are very small text or, I said, logical flow changes that need to happen. And some of these include things like terminology, which is one of the examples, is paper on glass, which frankly, I did not know what it meant until yesterday. And I had to look it up and figure out what it did. So, but that's all there is. I think these are all very easily doable.
Yep.
Taking them one at a time. And if you want, John, you can click one of those linked issues just to show what they look like. And yeah, so that's there. So I have taken Brett's feedback turned them into required changes, and then there's an acceptance criteria, and then I added a few labels and all of that just to ensure that anybody who's outside of our team looking at our issue tracker, it gets the sense that there is activity and not just people meet and just chit chat.
And just to give drilling down a little one step further on this particular observation or suggestion from Brett. He was looking at I think it was probably this use of the diagram. So if you notice that when I went to the home page for this, we repeat this diagram, and when we go to the about the project, we've got that diagram in again, and it's the same diagram in a few places. One of my thoughts, as you've explained the background to this sort of numbers of changes, is that we probably need different diagrams for different contexts. So whilst it might be the same fundamental sort of framework we're representing, we might represent parts of it simply, or highlight other areas or do some things, and not just always use the same image. Partly that was my laziness, because there's a lot of effort to get the whole site together, and I kind of repeated the image. So that's excellent. Thank you. I'll drill down on one other thing that I think is worth. So if you see down here, you've got these other issues now that are effectively created by Sankashan, but they kind of relate back to these 10 issues that relate back to the Brett Highland comment. The one that I want to share, particularly with you, Steve and Anne, I got on LinkedIn a response from a professor of, I think, sociology or something, saying something like, I note you use the term nation state. What do you mean by that? And I realized as soon as I was asked the question, I think I've been inheriting the use of the term nation state without really thinking too hard about what that explicit term means. And turns out it means more than I thought it did, and less, and all those usual things. So I went through the next logical phase of the current era of asking AI, how I should think about these terms, and it's come up with an explanation. Now, it recommends the use of the term state or sovereign state. I actually don't, its first recommendation is that primary recommendation. It actually has a secondary recommendation for UN member state. So my suggestion is that we actually go through the content of the project documents as they stand, and where appropriate, change the sort of use of nation state to UN member state, because it's much more specific and much more accurate for the use that we intend inside the grid. And that's sort of a change that we'll make as a kind of global search and replace kind of thing, but it's a little bit more messy than that when you're using a suite of markdown files and so on. But that's one of the other issues that we'll be correcting in the project. The last one, Steve, I want to draw your attention to of some detail, because it might be more of a discussion.
Quickly on that one about states.
Yeah.
I have encountered similar sort of concerns before about use of words. So UN doesn't like, and you're not using it anyway, the word economy, which we sometimes use as a proxy for a country. And I think you're right about nation state and UN member state. So, and I would say stick to two words, and it's context specific about which one you use. One is if it's about governance and who's updating the grid, I think UN member state is the right language, because that's our governance framework. If it's more generally just talking about nations and what they do, just use the word country, I think, rather than nation state or economy.
I absolutely agree with you in principle, but the word country, it turns out, but I mean, we're living, you and I, in Australia, and the word country has different meanings to First Nations people than it does to others. So I think as ever, with the wonders of the English language, there are so many different ways to interpret the same words and so many words. But I think the safe one certainly is UN member state, that has a legal article significance.
All right.
So the next thing that we're working on that is a bit chunky and won't be finished in a sort of in the next few days or in a week or so, is the work preparing what I think will be a merge request or an issue for the UNTP spec, Steve. So we're working on what would we need to change to the existing DIA spec, if anything, to make it even more powerful or fit within the sort of grid model, right? And so we're sort of working on a few lines of thinking. The one that I was promoting in this, when I first raised this issue, was an idea that says when a registrar goes through the process of registration of an entity, they do their due process, they do the things they normally do, and at some point, if they're successful, the application is successful, they issue some sort of identifier, they recognize the entity, and they do some things. The thing they issue is totally under their control. That's their responsibility, their liability, their legal role, and so on. In the DIA model, we're anticipating that the successful applicant will say, thank you, and here are some DIDs that I control that I want you to recognize if you can inside the DIA that I'd like you to issue. Now those DIDs are the applicant's control. They've asserted them. They can be checked by the registrar, but they're not controlled by the registrar. They're a sort of verifiable element that's been supplied by the applicant. And there's a difference, I think, in the type of data, therefore, between controlled and asserted by and under the control of the registrar, and the data that is supplied by the applicant that can be verified by the registrar. And then the third type is perhaps not used, but the third type is this has been asserted by the applicant, we haven't checked it, or it's not checkable, it's just metadata, or it's just other information. The discussion yesterday on this idea raised some concerns that we risk, and this is Harman van der Kooi, we risk a kind of an explosion of functionality inside the DIA. He loved the idea of the DIA being a kind of clean and mean kind of structure, which has only very little things in it. And he was expanding on the idea of using the DID doc as a place in which an applicant might put more information about other identifiers that they have been issued and so on. That's certainly true. And we talked about what I offered as a way of thinking is maybe this is the thing that allows it to be used in this way, but doesn't mandate it be used in this way. If you keep to the minimum DIA, then what we're saying is that is controlled by the registrar, they assert as ours, and that is asserted and verified by the applicant is noted by the registrar.
So my view on this, and this is just my view, right, is you're encountering the classic data explosion challenge that all registers have, which is, I'm an authoritative registrar of something and I maintain these facts, and somebody says, oh, you should maintain these extra facts and these extra facts. And most of them, and whenever you do that, it turns chaotic, right? And real question is, who is the authority about this or that? Remember that this DIA is issued by the authority. And I think you're getting on very shaky ground if you ask an authority to sign something that contains data that they don't control. So that third layer of stuff, I wouldn't put anywhere near a DIA at all. The second stuff, the claimant is saying, this is my DID. And he's asking the authority to confirm the relationship between the DID controller and the authoritative registrar. So you can't put a DID in the DIA unless the authority verifies control of the DID before issuing the DIA, right? I think.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. So and that probably stops there. The other thing, you might want to put typical. I think the interesting question is, what is an expansion point? Sorry, what are the common data elements that all registers maintain? One obvious one would be status and registration date, maybe some sort of type. That's public data that a registrar already maintains. And then there could be some registrars that maintain a lot more. So I don't see anything wrong with an extension point in a DIA, but it's the purpose of that extension point is for the authority to choose what extra data they want to put in a DIA that they run, not for the recipient of a DIA to ask the authority to put all this random data in it that the authority can't verify, because then you're going to run into a quite messy governance problem, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot, very good point, Steve. And I think that one of the points you made early on was about the explosion of data managed by the registrar. Yeah, that would be a real no-no. And I think what's interesting is to reflect that the issuance of a DIA, for example, just including the DIDs from the applicant, they don't necessarily have to. This is thinking in real time. Keep a record of the DIDs that applicant provided when they were registered, because it's not data under their control, as you rightly point out. At the point of registration, the legal thing is we registered this organization, we've given this identifier, we recognize them to be this thing. They supplied these DIDs. And they asserted they control them. We verified that they control them at the point of registration. After that point, they might lose control of those DIDs, and so you don't want the registrar to be responsible for that. That's why we need this differentiation between I control and live and die on the hill of this data. It's my legal responsibility to do so. This other data is I verified it, but it's not something that I am controlling.
Yeah, so I think a key part of the governance would be that it's clear that when a regulator or a registrar issues a DIA, they are attesting to a point-in-time verification that the DID presented to the registrar is genuinely controlled by that party at that time.
Yeah,
and they will. I'm guessing no register will want to make such a claim without recording that they made such a claim. So they probably will save the DID somewhere. But it doesn't follow that if the DID key gets compromised, that it's the registrar's job to fix that. Right? It's the individual. So that needs to be clear. So I think that's okay. I wouldn't put any data in there that is just from the claimant or the recipient saying, please add this data to my DID, because I think that's the whole purpose of digital facility records and all other related data. The purpose of the DIA is just that trust anchor.
So
keep it lean and mean. I agree with Harman.
So Harman offered then an example, because he's been working with the Dutch Ministry of Commerce a lot, the KVK, and he offered the insights that the KVK is issuing 3 types of identifiers even now. The first is the KVK number, a number equivalent to the company number from the UK or ASIC ABN in Australia. The second is they are also an LOU for GLIFE, a local operating unit. So they can issue an LEI if their applicant asks for an LEI. And they can also, in the now or in the near future, issue an EUID, the business identifier that the EU is sort of defining in the current legislation. Each of those 3, no doubt, has a fee or a charge associated with it. So you can ask for the first one. Is there kind of national legislative role responsibility, KVK number. The other two are almost like add-ons. Like, you know, do you want fries with that? We can give you an LEI. Now, the discussion we had yesterday was, well, does the KVK want to issue 3 DIAs or 1 DIA with 3 identifiers in it, or what? And my response was, I don't want to make that decision for KVK. I want them to have the choice and let them decide what is the most efficient, effective way for them to approach this. And that's sort of that was one of the other interesting points. So as I said at the beginning, we're not probably going to resolve the issue in the next day or two, but it's where we're kind of developing the thinking about, is there any change to the DIA spec that needs to be made?
Yeah, fine. Well, when you're ready, we'll review it and update the UNTP site, because it is really nothing more than a draft on UNTP anyway. We'll look forward to that. Yeah, and I think Harman's point, keep it light and tight, and don't ask a registrar to put anything in there that they're not confident to put in there, because it's either their data or they verified controllership of a DID. That would be good. And the optionality, well, if they want to put 3 identifiers in 1 DIA, I think that's feasible, because they can verify and control them all themselves. All right. The more optionality you have, there's Postel's principle, right? Which is every implementer of this then must accommodate that optionality when they verify things. They may be very tight in what they issue, but they've got to be quite got to accommodate all options when verifying. So
I think you're right. There is a risk of complexity and or at least complications of increasing scope as we go forward. The one while you were talking, I've just realized one of the requirements we're making for eligibility for the grid, for membership of a registrar of the grid, is that they are given legal status by their UN member state, that there is legislature that defines their role and responsibility in their UN member state as a registrar of whatever thing it is that we are including.
Yes.
Now, where we've mentioned KVK is both an issuer of a KVK number. I'm sure that is in the Dutch legislation, that there's a whole bunch of laws around the issuance of a KVK number. Their role as an LEI issuer, well, that's a GLIFE thing. And that's unlikely to be in the Dutch legislation. So if we think about this idea that where's the legal text that supports your issuance of this thing, the legal text goes in 3 different directions now. It goes to the national Dutch direction for the KVK number, goes to some sort of GLIFE contract or something, I suppose, for GLIFE, and then it goes to whatever the European Union legislation is around EUIDs. So it's I'm taking your point now. It's actually getting complicated if we have a DIA with 3 types of identifier in it.
Because it isn't the whole point of a VLAN, in some ways, is the same as a DIA, right? It's basically DIA and the DID, right? So the purpose of a VLAN is something verifiable that I can use to sign trade documents that is traceable to something trustworthy, right? So I would have thought it's quite reasonable and feasible to separate these things. And I'm either signing with my DID and I'm presenting a DIA that links that to my KVK, or I'm signing with my VLAI, which as part of the VLAI process includes some sort of delegated authority for GLIFE to act on behalf of KVK and so on, right? And so I'm not sure I'd want to confuse those anyway, right?
Yeah, so it could be that we land after more thinking on no, actually there be monsters, and we'll keep it very simple, as was the first response from Harman, like lean and mean. So that's sort of that's one of the issues that will be bubbling around for a few several meetings, I suppose. I think, is there any one Sankashan you think we need to be drawn to from the list from Brett?
I don't think so. At this point, these are all fairly simple ones.
Okay, so I think scrolling back, those are the kind of main bodies of work. Okay, thank you, Steve. Good to see you. Those are the main issues that we're kind of working on that. And you've been either very quiet, polite, or unable to speak. Is there anything? Are you able to? Is there anything you want to say? Any questions?
No, everything is fine. I'm actually just trying to figure out my way around GitLab more so than anything. I think I started to see that. And yeah, so that means I have to now know where all the issues are and how to go through them. And then I would start looking at them. Quick
Cool.
question. I know that you migrate a lot of the documents over here on GitLab. How do we go? So if I read it and I have a question, do I just create?
Create an issue on here. Yeah, create an issue
Okay.
on this GitLab. So if I don't know if you can see the screen, but if I this is the current layout. This will actually get simpler because the about the project will probably collapse these elements into sort of one body. It's one of Brett's sort of observations that there's too many repeated introductions to the project. But if we look at the project deliverables, we've got a number of sort of files underneath that heading, but we've also got an archive, and the archive has older versions of these documents so that we don't lose the details that were there. Because what happened a couple of weeks ago was that I did a significant very significant simplification process, and Sankashan, in fact, think there's probably some details that have been lost in that simplification process that we might need to bring in. So when you look at these documents now, if you look at the web pages of these documents and read them, what you should see at the bottom is an opportunity where it goes edit this page. If you click edit this page and you've got your GitLab environment and your login, then you'll bring up the markdown. And at this point, you could effectively start doing a fork and do whatever else and propose some changes, or you could raise an issue.
Okay.
And sort of say, okay, there's a bit of the content here that I think needs to change, and we can discuss it at the next meeting.
Okay.
I think if from this interface, if you do direct edits, it actually should convert into an issue for merge.
I think because I've got sort of super user sort of status.
Yeah, you are admin, so
I get a different thing. I can get immediately smash stuff and break things. So I think if you're logged in as a proper sort of designer, developer, whatever the normal role is, I think you'll get a different a choice there. And I think you're right, Sankashan, it should raise a sort of an issue or a merge request out of any change you make.
That's a good point. All right, so I think I started to figure out how to use it.
It is similar to GitHub. It's a Git environment. It's got some slightly different terms. So it's not a pull request, it's a merge request, and a few other things are different, but fundamentally it's kind of the same.
Okay.
Okay.
So about these issues, yeah. So what you were talking to with Steve about the UNTP DIA. So what would be the conclusion then, that we treat it as optional, but it should be there, right?
I think the conversation that I just had with Steve is not conclusive yet. That we recognize the risk of increasing complexity of burdening registrars, but I think he's recognized that the simplest way to think about the DIA, the simplest expression, is it's this identifier issued by the registrar, and then to make it this DIA that's usable in the context of UNTP, the applicant supplies some DIDs under their control, one or more DIDs under their control, and the registrar checks that they are under the control of the applicant. For me, that means there are two types of data in the DIA already, that directly under the control of the registrar, and that's supplied by the applicant and verified by the registrar at that time. What we're discussing also is, should we allow the DIA to have more than one identifier, the KVK conversation? Do we allow any other type of data in there at all? I would think that the momentum is shifting to no, we don't. That would be a burden for the registrar. It risks a bunch of things to do with their managing data they don't want to manage, and so on. So I think that issue that we have sort of working on, and you can see Harman and I having a conversation. We're going to tune, if you like, the recommendation. Now, I've got a question. I don't know if you can answer it, Sankashan, in terms of whether you're physically able to come back on the call, but if we, in this conversation that Harman and I and others will join in, and Steve and I just had, realize actually the way we want to describe it, we want to change, I kind of want to edit the this top heading summary of the issue. But then if I edit that, then these comments will no longer reflect the issue as they were commenting on, if you see what I mean. What's the best way to...
The best way is essentially opening a new issue with the update that you want and resolving this with a closing comment saying that the content or the discussions are now out of date and the new idea is being tracked in this particular issue. That way you... Go ahead.
I might have to keep repeating that, of course. That's good. That makes sense, right? Does it also make sense, though, that I take... anticipating that to be a repeating process of we're gradually tuning this. This then feels more like a document in the set of documents we're producing. We create a a draft submission to the UNTP as a sort of visible document inside the same sort of set of documents we have here, and then we can do merge requests and changes and raise issues on it and so on. And it's sort of it feels more natural. It feels like that's what it should be like.
So there are two, I think the way I understand it, there are two distinct things you are mentioning. One is that you had a baseline document on which there was a discussion that is happening. At some point during the discussion, all of us realized that the baseline document might need to have a revision, a minor or a major revision, but the discussion stream is now redundant because we have discovered new topics or new relevant pieces to talk about. So which means that as it happens in real life conversations, that discussion stream stops. In software term, it gets archived and a new discussion stream comes up. How you deal with the baseline document is versioning, as you described. You can actually make a version of it and then move forward. And then link the discussion to the new version of the document.
So I'm struck by, I'm thinking ahead, I suppose, I'm trying to, about ultimately we're going to give a merge request back to UNTP, a change request for UNTP. If we were to take a copy of their existing spec, the DIA, the page that describes the DIA, and bring it into our environment, and then work on that spec document in our environment, we'd end up, after the process of discussion and versions and issues and so on, with something I hope that we're comfortable with, which we can then kind of push back. I mean, it's like, having a kind of public
essentially you are doing a project fork because you want to have your own space to build things, and then you tag something from you make all the changes that you need in your fork, and then you basically bundle everything up into a PR merge request and say that here's what it is, and they have to reconcile with whatever their main branch or branch they want to merge it into. So that they will have a bit of a lifting and shifting to do. But given how the UNTP DIA spec is moving, I don't think you're going to be very much out of sync.
Yeah, it's not moving very fast at the moment. I think they're waiting for us to say this is how we think you should change. So I don't think
classically there are two ways this is done. One is that UNTP DIA will be considered an upstream. So anybody who wants to make changes, say you are a dependent project, but you want to make your changes into UNTP DIA. In open source software, some projects actually encourage come upstream and do your stuff, and then you and merge and do. You don't need to revisit and do it again. Other projects, if they're very fast moving or they're too large, they encourage you to kind of create forks. For instance, the Linux kernel encourages you to create forks of the subsystems you want to work on and then send merge requests back. But there are other simpler projects like, let's say, OpenSSL. They have asked you to come upstream and do whatever you want to do. And they review all of that there. So both are legitimate points. I think it depends on what the upstream is comfortable with, and more importantly, what as a downstream project we would be comfortable with. If you think that getting all our stuff downstream, getting it packaged and ready, and then taking it is easier for us in terms of management, then that's a legit path to take.
I don't have a quick answer to it. I guess I'll think about it. Thank you about the best one. If you think there's a really good way to do it, perhaps we then update the issue we have here and say, actually, the best way to handle this conversation is going to be whatever X, and then we kind of do X and, as you say, close the issue and start a new conversation in whatever form it takes. Okay, yeah, I'll think about it for a bit. Let myself think without trying to do it in real time. Okay, that was all I had for today. And you're very much encouraged to join the fray, raise issues, comments, and so on, and reach out to either myself or Sakashan and Steve if you need, if there's any questions about how to use the GitLab environment to make that work.
Okay.
Before we
One
go-
more.
Sorry, and go ahead.
No, just a very good question. When Steve was mentioning about public feedback, I think I sort of maybe wasn't, I missed that conversation. Is it a requirement for the next step, or is it only for if one would be getting the
So
recommendations to, yeah.
Public feedback has two. We're producing a document that Steve called, or can be called, a technical specification, and that was one of the suggestions he made in the beginning when we were talking about the dates for plenary and forums and so on. So even a specification should have a period of public review. Now, as Steve remarked, we are very much in a public review phase right now because the public is invited to review the documents. But what he is saying is there's a bureaucratic kind of administrative difference between submitting our documents to the UN CEFACT Bureau and saying, these are now open for public review.
Right.
And that's the phase he's talking about, public review, where we have effectively finished our work as far as we're concerned. They're stable. We're not doing any more edits on them. And we're saying to the public, hey, now have a look. Now, if we were working towards, as we likely will for November, a recommendation that all nation states adopt a thing, then that recommendation itself also has a specific and prescribed public review period, and then a kind of closed review period within the UN Bureau and the CEFACT participants. So there's a sort of, that for us, all we need to think about is that we work together as a team, we create a set of documents we consider to be robust and complete enough, and then we'll tell the UN CEFACT Bureau that, hey, we're done, these are ready for public review, and they'll make some announcement. If they did what they did before, they'll just do a LinkedIn post or something. But anyway, there'll be an announcement saying it's ready for review, and then there'll be something like 30 days during which we handle comments and just accept or reject and make changes if necessary, and then the public review is over and the documents are deemed done.
Okay.
So if we have a May forum to aim for, we basically want to be ready for public review before sort of mid-April, and more likely, I've suggested end of March is for when we want our documents to be ready and schmick and finished.
That makes sense, because then whatever feedback you get, have a little bit of time to incorporate the change. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Very last question. For the public review, we would grab all of these into one long document, or we just still keep them in this multiple?
I would. Oh, well, I'm hesitating. I'm not really hesitating. The answer is it depends. I would hope, I would argue, suggest that we are very much in an environment that makes it easy to do public review, subject to us having organized this representation, this presentation of information in a way that, for example, people like Brett Hyland go, yes, that's now clear to me, and I'm not confused by the repeated introductions to the project or whatever else. So that's why we need to do the housekeeping to make the presentation and the content that is presented as simple and clear as possible. Now, it is also possible to, and I've been working in the background, to generate kind of PDFs and to consolidate all of these documents into one big document. I do think that the documents we have here separately, the economic argument, the registrar data, legal governance, could arguably be part of one whole single document, and it wouldn't be too hard to create that, but it's easier to edit and comment and maintain if they're separate documents at the moment.
Okay.
So that could be a publication process, if you like. So for me, the review could be of the content as it stands, because it's sort of easier to manage comments and feedback and make changes. And then once that's over, perhaps there's a print version, if you like, that's produced from the content, which doesn't change any of it, but just packages it up into a single PDF or printable document.
Okay. Oh, it just questions of the procedures, because I know some standardizations, organizations have specific procedures and forms and that you have to use and all that sort of stuff. So I wonder if
there will be, I'm sure there will be templates and forms to come. And that's where I think that, so after public review, I think we are likely to have to format the content in a way that fits the CEFACT sort of standard. And I've seen, for example, you can see into the white papers and the recommendations and so on have a particular structure and look. And I think we'll have to take the content. And then that's almost why I don't want to do that too early, because that's a fair bit of work. And you only really want to do that with content you don't have to keep changing. Otherwise, you keep having to put it into that format again.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you very much, Sankashan. Good to see you both. And have a great weekend.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.